Good afternoon and welcome to this Royal Irish Academy of Music online guest lecture. It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Mieko Kanno from the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, who will be presenting a lecture entitled Empathy in Music Performance. Professor Mieko Kanno is Professor of Artistic Research in Music Performance at Doc Mus Doctoral School, Sibelius Academy, the University of the Arts, Helsinki. As a violinist, Mieko Kanno first came to international attention in the 1980s when she won prizes in international competitions such as the Karl Flesch in 1986, Queen Elizabeth of Belgium in 1989, and Hanover in 1991. Later, she developed an interest in performing contemporary music and received the Kranichsteiner Music Prize at the Darmstadt New Music Institute in 1994. Since then, she has been a prime exponent of new music for violin throughout Europe and has given many first performances as soloist as well as in ensembles. She has a parallel career as performer and academic and is dedicated in both capacities to the development of a new practice in music. She is especially known for her pioneering work on subjects such as complex notation and microtonality, and her research ranges from performing on the Violectra electric violin with electronics and commissioning works for it, to a long-term project on Job Cage's Freeman Etudes. She also plays Baroque violin and has worked extensively with the Ensemble Florilegium in the late 1990s. Engaging with a wide range of repertoire remains an important principle for her. She has worked at Durham University in England from 2001 to 2012 and the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland from 2013 to 2016. She moved to Finland in 2016 to take up the position of Professor in Artistic Doctoral Studies at the Sibelius Academy, the University of the Arts, Helsinki, and was also for 2018 to 2021 Director of the Centre for Artistic Research at the same university. In addition to the Violectra electric violin, she plays a Giovanni Grancino violin dating from 1685. I would like to thank Mieko most sincerely for accepting my invitation to present this online lecture. I hope we can welcome you to Ireland in person sometime in the future, but for now we are delighted to have Professor Kanno with us today to present this guest lecture entitled Empathy in Music Performance.
Thank you, Denise, for a very nice introduction. So I'm Mieko Kanno. I'm talking from Helsinki. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be talking to you today. The title of today's talk is Empathy in Music Performance. And I'll be following a particular line of questions, such as, do we have a capacity for sharing empathy? Yes, we hope we do. But how appropriate or up to date is our capacity for it, in music in particular? So then I have two disclaimers. First, that today I will be talking less about my own research interests as such, because probably you know me about, talking about the violin, contemporary music, live notation, electronics, and so forth. But today I want to talk more about general concerns I have about music performance. So the second disclaimer is that I speak as a specialist in music performance, but also as somebody deeply involved in the education of musicians. Empathy characterizes the power of music. Music can move you to intense emotions, or it can simply affect your mood. There are many ways in which empathy happens in music. we know much about how empathy works in canonical art music and in commercial popular music. But we know less about how to generate empathy in music. The knowledge is even more scarce when it comes to communicating music that is new, lesser known, or outside of the norm. Musical values, sensibilities, and perspectives that are outside of the standard also suffer the same lack of music, such as music making by non-male musicians. The empathic power of music lies in its intangibility, yet, ironically, the ambiguities in this power, or sometimes its abuses, also originate from the same intangibility. So, what is empathy? Empathy is a human ability which enables an understanding and sharing of feelings between people. It is said to have three types. The first is cognitive empathy. It is about getting to know someone else's thoughts and feelings from this person's own perspective. The second is emotional empathy, which may bring you closer to this person after gaining cognitive empathy. Emotional empathy can be contagious and often involves physical sensations. The third kind is compassionate empathy. This often leads to an action of wanting to help. There are related concepts too. Sympathy and compassion are often included as types of empathy. These concepts can be understood as special forms of empathy in the way in which I have defined empathy so far. Sympathy is an emotionally concordant type of empathy, often in relation to sorrow or pity. Compassion can be understood as an intensified case of sympathy that leads you to take actions. In my thinking, in my approach, however, I make clear distinctions between empathy and these related concepts. Empathy emphasizes understanding of someone else's thoughts or feelings, while not necessarily sharing or agreeing with them. This is the point that differentiates empathy from sympathy. Furthermore, empathy is different from compassion on a similar ground, but they are further distinguishable in the social environment in which they take place. Compassion often assumes an existing barrier or a social class difference between the people which the act of compassion tries to cross. In contrast, empathy assumes equality between the people, no barrier, and often requires an effort from both parties towards a democratic understanding about an idea, person, or action that is previously unknown to them. The egalitarian ground for empathy, as well as the cognitive and emotional effort required for empathy, are essential characteristics of empathy as I approach the subject. Next, empathy in existing research. The topic of empathy has been widely explored in philosophy, aesthetics, and psychology. Music education, music psychology, and neuroscience have revealed both the function and effect of empathy in music. There are other disciplines which may not explicitly reference empathy, but take it at the foundation of communal knowledge. For example, music semiotics or semiology articulates meaning that is shareable within a certain cultural group. Likewise, cultural anthropology strives to articulate cultural characteristics of a specific group of people. The idea of a community often underlies that of empathy. Music can touch you, but you cannot touch music. By saying music can touch you, we are referring to empathic touch. In contrast, in the second phrase, you cannot touch music, we are referring to haptic touch. Music is not a thing that we can see or touch. It is intangible, but we can touch musical instruments to make music, including our body when we sing, and in so doing, we develop a profound sense of haptic touch, as if to compensate the intangibility. When we listen to music live, the sound waves also touch us physically, making it an haptic experience. Even though empathy is the prominent way in which music communicates, haptic touch is an integral part of musical experience. Having said that, music is communicated primarily in sound and engages the oral sense. My desire to focus on empathy is also a reflection and response to the vision-dominant sense orientation of the contemporary society. Sonic skills are used less and less. It is fascinating to observe how they were used, how sonic skills were used in the past, even as late or recent as in the 20th century. For example, car mechanics used to judge motor functions by listening to the engine. This became replaced by visual meters in the mid-20th century to enable analysis of the mechanical functions by the drivers themselves. Today, some uses of sound and sonic skills remain, such as fire alarms and stethoscope, the classic picture of a doctor's authority in medicine. Well, instead of lamenting about the disappearance of sonic skills in society, I would like to ask what contribution sonic skills can still make in this society. I think that sound still has a potential to tell us about the world in ways other senses cannot, and it is our responsibility as music specialists to ensure such means of knowledge acquisition and dissemination. So, as a way of exploring empathy in music communication, I want to consider interface as a tool to link between musicians and audience in contemporary art music. What is an interface? Interface is a point or surface where two groups, subjects, or systems meet and interact. It is most frequently used, the word is used, when talking about computers, where it means a program or device that enables a user to communicate with a computer. It is a point at which connection is made. So next, why? Why do I focus on the idea of an interface? It is because music is a communicative art form rather than a standalone object. In the 20th century, music was considered and studied as an art of organized sound or combining of tones. In the 21st century, emphasis has moved from the thing, music, to the in-between and beyond. Focusing on the interface between musicians and the audience allows consideration on the relation between music-making experience on the one hand and music listening experience on the other. In so doing, it leads us to question and redefine both experiences, music making and music listening. Interface as a focus of study expands the subject matter from music alone to the broader subject areas that I have mentioned earlier. Much of the music education in a conservatoire setting, like yours and ours here, where Western art music is studied, remains such that music is situated in nearly an hermetic isolation. It often says that there are certain authentic or right ways in doing things. Such ways of doing things are often called traditions. I'm not here going to critique pros and cons of this type of education. I would simply like to point out that this ethos creates an atmosphere which encourages a singular aspiration to deliver an ideal performance. In this atmosphere, no interface is necessary because there is only one kind of performance to be delivered by each musician. But the reality of music making is never singular. There is always a different context. We have different people to play with, different people to play to, and different occasions at which to play. Musicians learn to adjust for each context while simultaneously somehow holding on to the singular ideal performance. But the aspirational singularity is not equal to the copy and paste sameness in the realizations. Different performances by the same person of the same piece can be equally good. They are just differently good. As we move towards the mid-21st century, we are becoming more comfortable with the notion of multiplicity and embracing it, even in art music. My contention is that the idea of an interface enables this multiplicity further by providing a conceptual open space for it. It encourages us to think more constructively about how to respond to each music-making situations as appropriately and creatively as we can. It is not about how to tolerate a less than perfect situation. The results of this new way of thinking may affect not only the way we communicate music, but also the music itself. I believe that we are taking a quiet but distinctive step in rethinking music as cultural discourse. So next, I'd like to give you 3 examples of such interface constructions by citing 3 doctoral projects at Sibelius Academy, so that you get an idea what kind of interface we are talking about, or it can be. So example 1 is Lucy. Lucy is a clarinetist. She searches for different venues and locations for her performance according to the repertoire she wants to present. She also finds locations first, then think about what to perform there. Her research focuses on discovering similarities and differences in the contemporary music culture between the USA and Finland. Her identity as a clarinetist locates her research firmly in the performer perspective, not only on how to play, but also how to present music. She searches for appropriate ways to present music for clarinet and electronics or music performance in a botanic garden. She searches for a satisfying and pleasing experience for the performer, producer, and listener. She puts music making in a broader context. Her solutions are imbued with anthropological, sociological, and sometimes political considerations, bringing new insight to the practice. The next example is example 2, Maria. Maria is a professional violinist with a job in the Radio Symphony Orchestra and freelances as soloist and in chamber music. In her work, doctoral work, she asks what is involved in leading an ensemble of musicians. She looks closely at leading gestures, examining what gestures are for. She realizes that she uses gestures not only for fellow musicians, but also for herself as well as for the audience. She explores ways in which she can engage gestures to improve communication as music. She examines leading in the solo repertoire as a proof of concept. Bodily movement is her interface. The last example is Ville. Ville is a composer, and his research focus is on creating an affective bond between the ecological environment and the listener. His ecological cases relate to coal, oil, and wood. He introduces a new understanding about the relationship between humans and the environment through his composition. In his case, the affective bond between the ecological environment and the listener is the ultimate aim of his interface on which he works by composing music. He calibrates the interface carefully through compositional design. Although his interface is necessarily more abstract than the interface between the performer and the listener, the concern for calibration and considerations he brings to it are the same as in the other musicians' cases. So, these are examples, and they suggest 3 distinct interfaces that each musician has designed in search for the optimum communication in their own specialist areas. They highlight independently practical realities of each interface, its strengths, as well as challenges. Through grappling with real concerns, each musician determines specific ways and degrees of implementation to achieve the optimum. This type of artistic interface, if you like to call it, can be described as artistic curation. Curation or event design is an increasingly popular practice and profession in the arts. Directing an exhibition or event with original perspectives is becoming an art form in itself. But there is a fundamental difference between the artistic interface that I am discussing now and artistic curation. Curation usually acts on artworks that already exist, be it visual artworks, theater, or music. And it is usually executed by someone outside. It is a design process applied to finished artworks. Artistic interface, on the other hand, is a development that influences the ongoing process of art making, such as in the practices of musicians preparing for a performance. It can be said that artistic interface is a curation brought into the musician's expertise. The scalability within each interface, how much of this or how much of that, may not necessarily be a major concern for each musician if the interface is flexible enough to lead to a solution suitable for each occasion. But it becomes a significant topic when someone like me observe a group of artistic interfaces collectively as there emerge some patterns that invite contemplation and analysis. I contend that the scalability provides key information for the building blocks of music communication. It reveals phenomena that relate to both the aesthetic and social assumptions about music performance, including notions of musical excellence and competencies. So, I'm now talking about, in a way, constructive flexibility. For that purpose, I propose a conceptual system called scalable performance as a way of thinking in detail about the operational aspect of the interface that I explained earlier. Well, this is in reaction to the point I made earlier that we tend to seek a singular ideal performance. It is not my intention to oppose it with a philosophical argument. I just want to think pragmatically in a clear, constructive manner about the scalability within each interface, because musicians are interested in making each performance work at the end of the day. We, musicians, want to calibrate the interface with concrete parameters so that we can plan our performances imaginatively but in a reliable manner for a variety of occasions. With scalability, the interface allows us to prepare a performance even with spontaneity according to each context. It has the capacity to produce multiple kinds of performance without changing characteristic features of an intended performance. I like to think of such interface as a toolbox for musicians, a practical set of guidelines, or indeed a computer program on a laptop to assist in the concert, in the concert procedure for performers. The idea is not new. I'm not inventing anything here. Subtle performance adjustments commonly take place during the dress rehearsal. The existing scales include musicians' tempo adjustment in response to the room acoustics, or a pianist trying out the piano to adjust bodily technical details to suit the piano type in use, be it a Yamaha Baby Grand in a private home or a Steinway D in a large concert hall. Or it could be on-stage musicians' digital parametric calibrations for the monitors when using electronics. But these adjustments have happened until now within the confines of established assumptions of a concert hall culture. And established assumptions are changing and becoming more varied. One such example is the recent surge in online presentations of music performance. We've been making new adjustments as we go along, following intuition. We also practice an almost subconscious long-term scaling in music performance. For example, musicians prepare performance differently for auditions and competitions. Some colleagues advise that there are ways to succeed in these and can supply step-by-step instructions. These instructions are not usually cosmetic adjustments because they tend to affect the approach towards the target task, much in the way of sports psychology. The strategic nature of these instructions suggests that there is a methodology to scaling performance. Scaling goes well beyond adjustment. It is about education. Everything is scalable. Scaling, in this way, can take place in any music process, including and particularly composition. One of my first encounters with structural scalability was a collaboration with the composer Michael Edwards, working with his composition software. This software allows the performer to determine the length, pitch characteristics, and formal shape of the piece via computer user interface. By the way, it's called Slippery Chicken. There, you can set parameters according to your own preferences and generate a piece of music for each concert occasion. This program, the computer program, encourages the performer to generate an occasion-specific piece of music, the result of which demonstrates variety within the predetermined confines of the computer program. While Edwards is a composer, his main interest can be described as such that he composes a program that composes music. By the way, a performance or even a score generated for each occasion does not mean I have to sight read. Usually it's generated, let's say, a couple of days in advance, so it's okay. More recent experience of mine in this regard was with the composer Sam Hayden, based in London, of our collaboration to create a computer program using live notation for the performer. We produced a computer interface on which the performer could determine the duration, register, rhythmic, and pitch characteristics on the fly, in this case, really live, in a live situation. Like Edwards, each generation of the program resulted in a different piece, yet loosely identifiable as belonging to the same gestalt of the composition which the composer has designed in advance. Next, Johannes Kretz is an Austrian composer and improviser of electronic music, and he has a project on scalable compositions as a way towards varying outputs of a composition, where the calibration depends on the type of listeners. He says, back in the 17th or 18th century, it was normal to produce different versions of the same piece. Why not now? Kretz argues, as the audience become more diverse. My interest in scalable performance follows on from these experiences and examples. I realize that performers may not have thought about scalabilities in performance much beyond cosmetic adjustment. But we can be more imaginative and think in abstract terms to gain clarity over the topic. So I ask, in which dimensions do musicians adjust their performance? Are there new dimensions that we are discovering as communication technology evolves? What are the endpoints of the scale in each dimension? How does this way of thinking about performance affect the listener experience? And when we think about adjustable dimensions for listeners who participate in music performance, what are these dimensions? And how do these variables affect the performance that way round? I'm not answering these questions, I'm afraid. Certainly not today. It will take me the rest of my life. But there are at least two problems we face in this way of thinking that I want to share today. And again, I'm not going to answer them, but I want to share the problems I think we face. Namely, how diversity is understood in music, and second, how creativity is understood in society. So first, diversity. How diversity is understood in Western art music in particular. I have mentioned the listener's potential, the listener's potential role in affecting performance. When we talk about diversity in music, we look at it as a topic related to multiplicity with social implications. We are looking at how cultural variability is integrated as part of the idea of music. Diversity is often considered in institutional settings at least, somehow as an auxiliary in the order of making existent things more responsive to the demands of the increasingly cosmopolitan world. But I question if diversity is something more fundamental to the process of making things. The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu has successfully argued in his 1977 publication on practice theory that practical doing of things is always diverse because different people do them for different reasons and in different occasions. The fluidity, elasticity, and flexibility is the essence of any practice that survives and flourishes over time. This does not surprise anyone in music. Why, then, is diversity put in opposition to singularity or authenticity? Surely, isn't it possible to present both singularity and diversity together as a unified whole in music? The second problem I want to share is how creativity is understood in society. Creativity is a significant value in Western thought, and it is linked to innovation. Creativity is positive. It is even a criterion for assessing anything new in research and in the arts, particularly in contemporary arts. But creativity and tradition are often perceived not to mix well together, because tradition is seen to represent the past and creativity the future. I have just said that tradition needs fluidity, elasticity, and flexibility by referencing Bourdieu. Can these qualities of mutation be considered creative or not? If not, why? at the root of any prosperous music that has a tradition, such as the performance of Western art music, creativity is exercised but often hidden from the surface. And I'm talking about the performance side rather than composition here. The case is more illuminating when we consider traditions outside the West. Many Asian traditional arts emphasize the acquisition of traditional styles above personal creativity. The apprentice period may last over 60 years before any artistic individuality is ever encouraged. Are they therefore not creative? Should they be considered only as craftsmen rather than artists? Is the emphasis on creativity and innovation a universally good thing in the arts? Finally, by contemplating on empathy and by focusing on the interface as a means for sharing empathy, we are perhaps moving towards a new theory of practicing music that centers our attention on the mix and balance between the aesthetic and the social. This theory is not about how to play a piece of music, nor how to appreciate a particular genre of music. It will show how music communities can imagine futures collectively in sharing Beethoven, new music, gamelan, or any music. While there are some excellent projects of this type, consideration of the social dimension is still rare in art music. The pandemic has made us more conscious of communities that continue or have appeared or disappeared over the last 2 years, in person or online. We are relearning collectively about how to share empathy in society and how music can contribute to it. I hope that my presentation today encourages you to think about empathy this afternoon, particularly when you practice music. Thank you.